Welcome to Main Street, Nevada County. My name is Jim Firth. I'm the host of Main Street, Nevada County. Our guest today is Forrest Hurd. His son, Silas, is a user of medical cannabis. Welcome to the program. How is Silas doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here today. So before I answer how Silas is doing, just quickly let everybody know, what his condition is. Silas is an 8-year-old boy. He's been in the paper quite a bit here in Nevada County, who has a rare form of epilepsy called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. There are 9 types of rare epilepsies, but let's just, to summarize it, just say that none of them are good, and they're categorized by really intense high levels of seizures that are considered intractable epilepsies, meaning that they don't respond to medication generally to stop these seizures. So, Silas was a boy who was developing healthy. He was a healthy boy. About 3 years old, he had a seizure. By 4 and a half, he was having way over 1,000 seizures a month. So very quickly and very rapidly, he became very ill. And like any parents, we were seeing every specialist we could. We ended up being referred to UCSF, some of the best doctors in the Western United States, the top child neurologists there, and nothing was helping him. He went through 12, 13 different medications, phenobarbital, or the medications these kids get, benzos, opioids, anything to try to stop these seizures, and nothing stopped them. So eventually, through our doctors at UCSF, we were recommended to try medical cannabis because at the end of 2014, his seizures were so significant that he wasn't able to go to school anymore, and he was just deteriorating. The brain can't take thousands of seizures a month, and which is why a lot of these conditions are considered childhood epilepsies, because prior to this, with no treatment, a lot of the kids unfortunately just didn't live to see adulthood. So how is he doing today? Well, he's up and down. Right now, we just got a new batch of the medical cannabis that helps Silas, and last month he had 450 seizures, and since we got this new batch, he's been seizure-free for 12 days. They've completely stopped.
That's great. That's really good news.
We're very excited.
Okay. Yeah, the Board of Supervisors adopted a ban on all outdoor growing of marijuana earlier this year, as you know. One of the results of the ban is to deny the outdoor growing of medical cannabis, where it is otherwise legal in California. How has this ban affected your family, and what do you see happening as a result of that?
Well, this is really how my family got to be known in the county, because of its impact on our family. How it affects our family is that the medicine that took us 2 years to find and locate and establish a network for being able to provide and produce for Silas, not just Silas, but other children as well, is no longer able to be provided. These aren't commercially available medicines. We're ahead of the curve as far as what's available commercially. And because these are medicines that are concentrated in oils, they have to be grown organically and they have to be grown outdoors because the fertilizers necessary for indoors can be toxic when they're refined and concentrated. So essentially, W took away our ability to get access to that medication, which is what we were notified when the ordinance 2405 was passed. And that's when I said, we need to really make the community aware of some of these children, so that they can see the consequences of some of these bans.
Okay, when this was being discussed initially back in the beginning of the year, did you get the feeling that the folks who were going to be initiating the ban understood the science that's involved in medical cannabis?
No, and admittedly so. I personally met with 3 of the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Miller, Mr. Schofield, and Mr. Weston, and 3 for 3 acknowledged that they're completely unaware that some of these conditions existed, the complexity of the medicines that are being produced for these very critically ill children they weren't aware of. So I spent time trying to teach them about that, and they admitted to me that they weren't aware, and that it was kind of what came to a shock to them to find out these kids lived in the county.
And yet they went ahead with this total ban, regardless of your efforts to educate them as to what the realities were for your son and for other kids who may face similar situations.
Yeah, it was kind of a shock. You
Uh-huh.
know, I'm not in the cannabis community per se. You know,
Right.
I'm a parent who had to quit his work to care for his child full time, who's very ill, and I was into fighting for my son's life
Sure.
business, and through doctor recommendations got led to cannabis. So I had to learn quickly some of the ideologies that were really behind these bans. And you know, I foolishly thought that meeting with these men and teaching them about this, that there was no way that we could move forward with putting children's lives at risk, so that they would come too with working with me to help protect these kids while they sorted out cannabis in the county. And you know, I was very surprised that that didn't happen. Knowing that this was going on, they decided to move forward in the way that they did.
So there seem to be a lot of assumptions about medical cannabis and how it's lumped together with recreational marijuana, which
Right.
in my mind seem to be totally different commodities. And
Yeah.
I'm concerned that people don't understand well enough, even now, with all of the information that's been out there and available to people, that they're understanding how recreational marijuana is so totally different from medical cannabis. Can you try to explain that in somewhat simple terms so people
Sure.
can kind of understand it better?
Yeah, yeah, you know, and absolutely. And I think you're 100% right. And I think each time I see an op-ed in the paper, it just reinforces the fact that there's a real lack of understanding about the difference between recreational or black market problems, cannabis problems in our county, and the medicinal patients that these laws were created for to protect to begin with. So there's a lot of aspects to it. There's a real lack of understanding about the medicines that are created to help protect these kids. These are made from completely different strains of cannabis that are known recreationally. That's one misunderstanding. There's a common thread that I get a lot that, you know what, there's weed everywhere, so even if there's a ban, you guys will be fine. Well, that's just not understanding that these are completely different strains. You know, it'd be like banning all the mushrooms that are in the store, or saying, don't worry, there's some growing on your front lawn, you'll be fine, you can eat those. Well, they're both mushrooms, but so they're not both okay. And it's the same with strains of cannabis. They're highly different strains, highly different products that you get out of them. So these are strains that are really high in compounds called cannabidiols, CBD, CBG, CBN. They have no commercial really benefit. They don't get you high, so a lot of people don't want to grow them. They have no psychoactive effects, and what they do is they help your endocannabinoid system regulate, and you have a lot of synapses in your brain, which is why epileptics benefit from those. You have a lot of these receptors in your brain, which is why you see a lot of people with epilepsy or headaches and brain conditions really benefit. You have a lot of receptors in your gut, and that really helps those people benefit. So what happened is a lot of recreational growers or black market profit growers, because they're not regulated in any way, saw this medical system that is legitimate and have really taken advantage of it and abused it. And because of that, I think it's really caused people to believe that there's no legitimate medicinal use, and it's caused people to associate any cannabis grown with medicinal cannabis, which is just not the case.
There was an op-ed in the newspaper by Keith Davies, who works with the Grass Valley Chamber of Commerce. And I'm going to read just his comment from the other day. He says, after considerable research and attending numerous meetings to inform myself better, I have come to the conclusion that our local medical marijuana issue is not about medicine or better communities, but about money and greed. How do you respond to that, knowing that the medical cannabis industry has to be a not-for-profit industry?
I think that's one of those misconceptions, is anytime the word profit and big money comes into the conversation, folks need to realize that they're talking about something that is already illegal. Within SB 420 and Proposition 215, there is no profit allowed for medical cannabis. So every time the topic comes up about profit and the impact on the economy and the millions that flow through, that are talking about things that were legal before this ban and will be illegal before the ban and illegal after the ban. So anything that has to do with medical cannabis to be legal has to be done as a nonprofit status. You can't have any profit. If you're running a business, you're really allowed what they say is like reasonable, compensation, which is very small. So, I respond to those op-eds, and I read Keith Davies' op-ed in the Union, on two different levels. As a parent, it's devastating because what these people don't realize when they say these things is I have to answer these questions to my daughter when she sees these, or when we see no on W or yes on W signs that say it's not about medicine. When she asks, Daddy, don't they know that my brother's life is being saved by these? Why would they say this if they know that? As a parent, it's very difficult to try to answer those. It's a very emotional thing. So my first response to those is it hurts. It's very hard on parents who are fighting every day to save the lives of their children to see such an oversimplified black and white stance is no medical patients exist or they're all evil, And as someone who's been advocating, it just makes me want to teach people to recognize the difference between people who exploit the medicinal system and the real patients that it's there for to protect. And I think that's not being done well in the community right now. And a lot of the topics that are happening are centered around things that really don't have anything to do with Measure W.
Yeah, and what I'm noticing as well as that, and thank you for that, I think people really need to understand that medical cannabis is medicine. I mean, that's really the bottom line in a lot of this stuff. And the arguments, to continue with a ban, seem to resonate around people who are, thinking that reefer madness is somehow part of our culture still, where it might have been when Keith Davies, went to high school, and I went to high school about the same time he did, and I wasn't afraid, from seeing the movie. I was supposed to be fearful after watching that, right? But it was like, is this real or is this a comedy? I mean, what am I supposed to be taking away from this thing? And I'm afraid that the fear factor that is being instilled in some people who are going to be voting on Measure W, is just that. They're basing an argument on fear, and part of that fear, to me, has to do with what people are seeing as abuses of recreational marijuana, which is not what medical cannabis is. And I know a lot of people who do not support recreational marijuana, even though it may become law in California. For the state to go forward with recreational marijuana is going to be creating a product, an industry, if you will, that some people support. And I think it may make sense in some regards. People may want to get high because they haven't found that alcohol or pills or yoga or certain kinds of foods are making them high enough already. And frankly, I think that there's probably enough stuff out there to do that without having recreational marijuana. But the industry is not going to take hold here in Nevada County. To me, recreational marijuana is an indoor product that will most likely be cultivated in large-scale warehouses, likely in the desert in Southern California, where it's already being introduced through zoning changes and whatnot. But to me, the idea of having medical cannabis can make sense in Nevada County, economic sense, if you will. And I want your opinion on this, because my sense of it is that there are people in Nevada County who have experience and expertise in cultivation of the different strains of medical cannabis that can help your son, that can help other families with their children, if it's approached properly, if it's regulated, if it's taxed, if it's monitored, if the growing is zoned in such a way that it's not creating a nuisance. You have any thoughts on that at all?
Oh yeah, I've got lots of thoughts. Let me just say quickly, so that everyone can hear it directly from me, that I work with a very reputable nonprofit collective that I wouldn't have it any other way. Very legal, by the books, nonprofit collective. They've probably given and donated and provided far over tens of thousands of dollars worth of medicine to our family in the last year and a half that we've been working with them. We haven't been asked one time under any circumstance for a single penny in return for that. And I think it's critical that people know that when they say that these are just for profit, that there are plenty of places out there who are asking for nothing in return and literally saving lives in our community. As far as economic, benefits and growth of the community, there are things that Nevada County is falling behind in. And Measure W impacts that greatly. As the recreational growing and the indoor market, I think that's a good thing to talk about for another time. But Measure W is really just banning medicinal cannabis for legitimate patients so that they can tackle the black market industry. Sheriff Royal acknowledged that he felt that it was too cumbersome to be able to differentiate who was who. So instead of hiring more enforcement officers, instead of writing more comprehensive restrictions, regulations, or licensing processes, they decided to just make criminals out of sick people and patients, so that now there's no due process to go through to decide who's legal and who's not. Measure W has made it illegal for us to have the commercial activity that is very responsible, like the lab work activity that's a part of this process. These kids and a lot of these patients and medicinal patients don't smoke cannabis at all. That's a real misconception. These are highly refined, very specific medicines in oil form that are made by people who really know what they're doing and then tested and processed in pharmaceutical labs. All that is legitimate business that could be bringing money into our economy. All of that has been banned by Measure W, and it's also been banned for us to even transport it to these agencies to help work with. So even if we have pot or flower from cannabis that might be a strain that is medicinal, it's illegal for us to even take it anywhere to have it processed in the medicine for these kids, because you're not allowed to transport it under Measure W. So any legitimate commercial activity has now been made illegal in an attempt to just stifle any cannabis activity in the county at all. And the consequences of that are real. The consequences of that are going to impact the percentage of people in this county whose lives depend on these medicines. And to pretend that everyone's illegal or everyone's legal or everyone's taking advantage, I mean, as adults, we all know that the world doesn't work that way, right? We're on a spectrum, and there's going to be people who are taking advantage of the system. There's going to be people who are legitimate patients. Then there's going to be people who are patients who are critical and have serious conditions that are life-threatening. And those percentage of legitimate people and critical people are going to be impacted the same as the black market people who don't care what the law is either way. And that impact is something that we have to decide as a community, is it worth it for us? Is that a sacrifice that we're willing to make in order to tackle a black market that, as far as I know, we haven't hired a single enforcement officer to enforce these laws to follow through with.
The sheriff has acknowledged that he doesn't have the staff, to do the enforcement. That when they hire sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, they'll go through the training program here in Nevada County. They'll put in some time, and then they'll transfer to Placer County or to some other county, either in the state or even out of the state.
I believe they said they're 14 down right now.
So they don't have the staff. They hire the staff, but they can't keep them because they're going elsewhere. They're holding down the salaries, of the folks who are leaving below what they would make in other counties, is my understanding.
Yeah, mine as well.
And wondering why people aren't coming to take the jobs that are available. Now that's a Board of Supervisors issue, I believe, and a budget issue, I believe. which is kind of different from Measure W. But it's associated to it in that if the sheriff doesn't have the capacity currently to go after the illegal growers, the criminals in this, what do you think makes him think that the prohibition that's been placed on growing outdoor marijuana is going to somehow resolve the problem of these criminals not going deeper into the woods and continuing to do what they do, but cause even more environmental damage? I'm just not seeing how he's connecting these dots. Can you help me understand this at all?
You know, I wish I could, but I can't. And I think that as someone who's literally faced with the consequences of these ordinances and measures every day and sees the mortality of his own child be in question because of these, that's one of the most frustrating parts, because I've gone to a lot of meetings, people for yes, and I've really immersed myself in people who are the cannabis culture in this community to just try to learn as much as I can. And the people who are for yes on W, one of the biggest complaints was I had people living next door to me and they were growing cannabis and they were irresponsible and they were having parties, and I don't know anybody who's for that. And more than once I've heard, we called the sheriff's department and they said there's just nothing we can do, we're overwhelmed. Well, those people who have disrespect for the law, they were breaking the law. What I want everyone to understand is that all of those things were illegal prior to the ordinance being passed. So they were breaking the law before. So they're going to continue to break the law. And as I am going to more and more meetings, I meet more and more people that I don't necessarily agree with who say, this has nothing to do with us. We're going to grow anyway. We've been growing since it was illegal. We were growing when this medicinal thing started, and we're going to grow now. And the impact is really going to be on the people who follow the laws, the people whose children are on the line and can't risk breaking the laws. All the cannabis that we're hoping to eradicate is still going to be there, and there's been no plan put into place that shows me that there's any effort to step up enforcement, any effort to be able to enforce what is being promised. So people are going to solidify an ordinance into law by voting yes on W, but there's no plan to follow through with what's been promised, and it's going to strip away the board's ability to make any changes to the ordinance in the future.
So the outcome of a yes vote means things are just going to continue. If I'm hearing you correctly, what's been happening will continue to happen, except that people who need the medicine aren't going to be able to get the medicine. Crime, the criminals are going to continue to grow. There will continue to be parties going on year-round, I guess, now, if the proposal under Measure W is adopted. People are being asked to grow marijuana indoors
year-round,
all year.
Yeah.
The nuisance of traffic, assuming that's a nuisance, and I'm sure it is for some people if there's a lot of coming and going, that's only going to increase. If I'm understanding correctly, if somebody has produced marijuana for recreational use and is asking people to come to their farm, to purchase it,
right.
2 months out of the year, well, now they're going to be coming 12 months out of the year.
Well,
how does that resolve the nuisance of too many parties and too much traffic?
Well, it doesn't. That's what I don't think people understand, is that all of that was illegal before. That wasn't legal activity that we were allowing, and now with this ordinance, we're going to take that away. That was all illegal before, and they didn't have the staff to be able to police it. And now that continues to be illegal, and legitimate patients are also illegal with no additional staff to help enforce these things. And it's important for people to understand that Measure W isn't the ban on cannabis. The ban on cannabis is already existing in Nevada County. As of January 12th, when Ordinance 2405 was passed, they banned all outdoor cultivation. All this was put into place. Measure W is the board asking the public, do you want to make this permanent so no other board members can amend it? And to me, that is a huge leap, considering we have no idea if these laws are going to be effective or not. We have no idea of the consequences of forcing and encouraging amateur cannabis farmers to grow indoors, the fire hazards, the risks to the neighborhood. And the biggest shock to me is that not only do we not have a plan to enforce it, but all the mistakes that are going to come out of it, and every law has unintended consequences. The Board of Supervisors is now removing their authority and abdicating their ability to improve upon those or make any changes. They won't be able to amend it at all if it's voted on by the people. And that's what Measure W is. It's just solidifying it by popular vote. If Measure W fails, everything's still banned because the ban is an ordinance. The ordinance is still in place. And they've said that, well, we'll look at it again, but we're not going to allow this to become cannabis culture. So voting no on W doesn't mean cannabis is going to be everywhere. The board has said they won't allow it. It's just, do you want it to be written in stone by popular vote? And that, to me, is a scary proposition, not only for patients whose lives depend on educating the community so that they understand the consequences of these actions, but for the unintended consequences of the ordinance itself, which is forcing amateur people who we already know there's a lot of irresponsible folks out there to grow indoors year-round. You know, we're already worried about explosions and house fires, and when you force a bunch of people indoors like that, there's going to be consequences that we didn't intend. And I just don't understand why we would give up our authority to then amend those laws and regulations to help take care of those bad actors.
Yeah, I hear you, and I guess there is one way to begin to resolve that issue. And I'm hearing you say the first step is at least voting no on Measure W.
Absolutely.
And the next step for many people should also be then to be looking at the candidates for supervisor who are running for election or re-election this year and decide whether or not what they're saying about Measure W is how they feel about it, and whether they feel that the decisions that were made by the majority of the current board is really what they feel is the appropriate way that our county should be moving forward as it deals with the medical cannabis situation.
Yeah, voting no on W just allows us to amend and make changes in the future, which would allow us to make changes to protect children, like states like Texas and Utah. Way more conservative states than us have done that.
Right.
And I hope people would do that. And yes, vote. And I also am supporting Heidi Hall and Richard Harris in their runs because I believe they have a comprehensive plan to make a more responsible law in our county.
All right. Forrest, thank you so much for being here. Do
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me.